My beloved child, there are times when you wait for me to open a door ahead, yet all you receive is silence, not the empty silence of an abandoned room, but a weighted stillness, like snowfall so thick it absorbs every sound. And in that moment, confusion rises, because you are used to noise to reassure you that you are moving in the right direction. You assume silence means I am no longer there. But, my child, if I were absent, you would not feel this silence at all. My silence is not a void, it is a hand resting against your back, holding you steady as you are about to step into something you are not yet ready for. I know you have asked for a way forward, longed for clear direction, searched for a sign large enough to erase doubt. Yet, I also know that if I opened the road now, you would walk it with old momentum, carrying old reflexes, and you would call it blessing when it would only be repetition painted a new color. This silent door is not a wall. I did not raise it to wound you or to test your endurance. I formed it from the truth you have already seen. There are things which, once seen, cannot be unseen, not because I forbid you to go back, but because your soul no longer fits the old garment. I close the way back not with a loud slam that startles you, but with a slow clarity that helps you recognize that what once kept you safe has become too tight, and that if you force yourself back, you will be the one who gets hurt. This silence, therefore, is not punishment. It is a buffer, a place where you are held between two seasons, not yet stepping forward, yet no longer able to return, so that you can learn how to stand without leaning on motion. My child, I know that standing still makes you restless, like someone used to running, suddenly told to breathe. But look more closely. I have not placed you at a crossroads as one who is lost. I have set you on a threshold, where I want you to hear your own footsteps again. There were times you moved without ever touching the ground because you were walking on fear, on habit, on the inner voice that said, "Hurry, or you'll be too late." And the faster you went, the less you knew where you were going. So I hold you back not to take your future away, but to return you to the truth. You do not need to rush to be safe. Even when you think you are standing alone, I am right beside you, like an arm, gently bracing your chest when the wind suddenly shifts, so you will not break again from a step born of panic. And when you learn how to stay without fear, you will discover that this silence is not restraining you. It is recalibrating you, so that when you step again, you step with your whole self, not with old reflexes. There are days when you no longer know what to call this state. It is not sharp pain, yet not complete peace. It feels like being held between two breaths, one old rhythm you knew well, and one new rhythm you cannot yet live. You wake up, do what must be done, speak the appropriate words, but inside there is a feeling you cannot quite name, as though you are somewhere, yet belong nowhere. You cannot go back, but you cannot yet see the way forward. And in that space, your deepest fear is not failure, but the whispered question, what if I do not open the door? I see you standing there, not shouting, not pounding on the door, simply standing and waiting. Even when every part of you wants to run, you once lived by fast reflexes when unease came. You escaped when emptiness appeared. You filled it when fear rose. You acted so you would not have to feel. Now those reflexes no longer work the way they used to, not because you are weaker, but because I am doing something deeper. I am holding you so you will not tear yourself further. Some wounds do not heal by moving on. They heal only when you stop in the right place. My child, what troubles you most in this season is not waiting, but waiting without anything to hold on to. You were used to hanging your faith on clear markers, a promise, a sign, a specific date, so when your heart trembled, you knew where to look. Now I am loosening those handholds, not to make you fall, but to help you see that the constant need for something to cling to is what exhausted you. When there is nothing left to grasp, you are forced to feel the full weight of yourself, and in that very moment, you discover something profoundly true. You do not fall, not because you are strong, but because I am there, quietly bearing the weight with you. This silence does not give you an answer to carry. It gives you a ground to stand on without one. You are beginning to realize that this silence does not press you down. Even though it unsettles you, it does not paralyze you, it awakens you. This silence does not stop at your thoughts, it reaches your body before you can name it. Your shoulders drop more slowly than before. Your chest no longer tightens every time you think about tomorrow. There are mornings when you wake and do not spring up like someone late for a train. You lie there for a few more breaths. And for the first time, you do not feel guilty for it. In that space, what you have avoided for years finally speaks. You are tired. Not tired because you are weak, but tired because you have lived too long, as though rest were a flaw to be corrected. I do not need to say enough out loud. I let your body speak it first, that if you continue to force yourself, you will be the one who pays the cost. And when you listen without arguing, without self-blame, you step into a very gentle truth. Stopping does not reduce your worth, it simply returns you to where you belong. There were steps you once called courage, but looking back now, you see that you walked them with clenched teeth and shallow breath. You kept moving, kept functioning, kept the outward rhythm, while inside, hairline fractures were forming, small enough that no one noticed. Not even you. I saw them long ago. I saw that you continued not because you still had strength, but because you did not allow yourself to stop. And there, I blocked you not with a shout, but with a stillness so prolonged you could no longer pretend, not because you were about to choose the wrong direction, but because if you kept going that way, you would no longer be whole enough to go anywhere at all. I held you back not to make you smaller, but so you would not keep paying the price for a kind of strength whose time has passed. At some point, you realize that you are no longer searching for answers the way you once did, not because everything is resolved, but because you are weary of calming yourself with words that merely sound right. Before, whenever anxiety surfaced, you rushed to find something to hold on to, a promise, a reasoning, a neatly formed meaning, so you would not have to stay with the emptiness. Now those words no longer hold you. They pass by lightly, not because they are wrong, but because they no longer reach the place that is aching. And for the first time, you do not panic when that happens. You do not rush to patch the silence with new words. You simply stay. You stay with a day not yet clear, with a heart not yet certain, with a question still without shape, without calling it failure. In that staying, your faith shifts its place. It is no longer something you use to rescue yourself from anxiety, but a quiet trust that you are not standing alone in what you do not yet understand. I do not need you to hold the answer. I only need you to dare to stay when you do not yet have it. There are days when you stand still and see life continuing to move on, not in imagination, but right before your eyes. Others sign new contracts, step into new seasons, announce things you once thought you would have as well. You are genuinely glad for them, and truly so, but in your chest there is a subtle hollow that is hard to name. It is not quite envy, nor is it bitterness. It is simply a quiet question. What about me? I see that question. I do not fault you for it. because it is deeply human. But I also do not answer it by opening a door for you merely so you will feel less left out. I let you stand there with the truth you have already seen about yourself, that if you were to return to the old way, you would have to trade away the peace you have just begun to touch. I do not need to build fences. The truth you now carry has become the latch itself. And even though you cannot yet see the next step, you are being held here not because you are slow, but because you are awake enough not to move forward at a cost you can no longer bear. What exhausted you was not that you did not know where to go, but that you had never truly stood. You always kept an exit ready, not because you were weak, but because you learned that safety meant always having a way back. Yet living like that, you never placed your full weight on the ground. Every step was tentative, every decision suspended, and that drained you more than any journey ever could. So I closed the way back, not to trap you, but to let you experience for the first time what it is to stand fully, both feet on the ground, body no longer leaning, heart no longer braced to flee. And there you discover a truth that feels upside down. Safety does not come from always having an escape, but from no longer needing to run. The longer you remain in this door of silence, the more the old inner noise begins to settle, not because it is forcibly silenced, but because it is no longer being fed. You once used motion to avoid your deepest questions, busyness to evade a weariness you could not name, and you believed that if you stopped, everything would collapse. But as I hold you still, you begin to see that what truly stands firm in you does not require you to run. And what collapses when you stop was never part of your foundation to begin with. This silence is doing a quiet yet very real work, separating what is essential from what is secondary, faithfulness from blind endurance, my calling from the pressure of fear. There are days when you wake and wonder whether I am still leading you when everything seems motionless. But my child, there are movements that cannot be seen with the eyes, only felt through subtle changes in how you breathe, how you react, how you stop rushing to condemn yourself. I am teaching you to discern between the silence of abandonment and the silence of preparation. And the difference lies here in my silence. You are not forced to prove anything, not pushed to finish something, not compared to anyone else. You are simply invited to remain with what is. And it is precisely in that remaining that you begin to realize your identity is not built on how fast you move forward, but on whether you dare to stay with the truth. This door of silence is also protecting you from returning to bonds you have outgrown. I do not need to say much for you to understand that there are paths which, if you were to take them again, would cost you the peace you have just begun to touch. I allow you to feel this for yourself, to recognize that even though you could go back, you would no longer belong there. This is a very quiet grief, because you are not pushed away, yet you are not invited back either. And I know this grief runs deeper than the pain of rejection, because it requires you to accept that a chapter has truly closed. I am with you in this grief, not rushing to console you, not urging you to be strong, simply staying so you know that closure is not loss when what is preserved is yourself. This silence eventually leads you to a truth you once avoided. You do not need to understand everything in order to trust. I do not open the way ahead for you now, because if I did, you would grasp clarity instead of grasping me. I close the way back so that you have no option but to remain with me in the present, where you are no longer supported by old plans or familiar scripts. And here, in the moment where there is nothing to cling to, you begin to learn to lean on me, not because I explain everything, but because I am still there, steady, unchanging, not withdrawing when you ask your questions. My child, this door of silence is not a period, it is a long comma in your story, where the pace slows so meaning can sink in. I know you want to know when it will open, but I want you to know this first: when this door opens, you will not step through it as someone seeking an escape, but as someone who has been held long enough to no longer fear staying. That is why I do not open the way ahead now, and why I do not allow you to return behind, because I am preparing in you a new way of standing, a new way of walking, not driven by panic or haste, but by a steadiness born in silence. There is something you have not yet recognized in these silent days. Silence itself is revealing what you have spent your life, avoiding the fear of staying without guarantees. You are used to living with confirmation signals, nods from the outside, signs clear enough to assure you that you are on the right path. When I do not give you these, you think I am testing your faith, but in truth I am healing a deep place where you learned that you were only safe when there was assurance. This silence does not take away my guidance. It removes your dependence on needing to know beforehand, to understand beforehand, to be certain beforehand. Those things once helped you survive, but they also kept you trapped in a form of trust that was never whole. Within this door of silence, I do not prevent you from going back because you are unworthy, but because you have crossed a point of no return where your soul has learned the difference between living and merely existing. You could return to old habits, old relationships, familiar systems, but you would no longer find peace there, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer enough for you. I do not need to slam that door shut, simply by letting you see clearly what lies behind. You already know you cannot step back in with the same heart, and this truth, my child, holds you more firmly than any barrier ever could. This silence is also teaching you to distinguish between when I have not yet spoken and when I am no longer speaking. There are moments when I am silent because I am absent, but there are moments when I am silent because my next word can only be heard when you stop chasing the previous one. You once carried old promises like a shield, using them to soothe yourself when you were afraid. But in time, those very words began to obscure what I was newly forming in you. I remain silent so you do not cling to the memory of grace and miss my presence in the present. I have not withdrawn my promise. I am leading you to the place where that promise is no longer a concept, but a lived foundation. This door of silence is also where I am loosening your habit of blaming yourself whenever things do not move forward. You grew accustomed to believing that if there was no next step, you must have done something wrong, lacked faith, prayed insufficiently. You've been impatient, and that mindset exhausted you more than any journey. I keep you here to teach you something very different. There are pauses not meant to correct mistakes, but to stop treating yourself as the problem. You are not delayed because you lack something. You are being held because you are enough to no longer need to prove anything more. In this silence, I am also teaching you how to endure uncertainty without letting it erode you from within. You once believed that not knowing what would happen next was a danger. But, my child, it was knowing too much, predicting too early, preparing too far ahead that caused you to lose the ability to remain with the present moment. I am keeping you here so you may learn to breathe without calculating the next step, to wake each day without forcing yourself to believe that today must be different from yesterday in order to have meaning. This silence, therefore, does not make you smaller. It makes you spacious enough to hold the present without distorting it into the future. At times, this silence feels to you like a prolonged delay, but I want you to know that I do not extend anything in vain. Each day you remain here, Something within you is being laid down, not through effort, but through the weariness of holding on. You begin to release questions that no longer give life. The need to be understood by everyone. The desire to explain your journey to those who have never walked with you. I do not ask you to let go all at once. I simply remain long enough for these things to fall naturally from your hands when you no longer have the strength to grasp them. My child, this door of silence is not a place where you are forgotten, but a place where you are sheltered from your own haste. If I were to open the way ahead right now, you would walk with the same old rhythm, the same old fears, the same old need to arrive somewhere to prove that the distance already traveled was not in vain. I close the road behind you so you do not use the past as a refuge. And I do not yet open the road ahead so you do not use the future as an escape. I hold you in the present, the only place where you can truly meet me without being distracted by what has been or what is yet to come. And it is precisely here, within this door of silence, that a very quiet transformation is taking place. You no longer ask when, with the same tension as before. The question remains, but it no longer carries the panic that without an answer, you will collapse. You begin to sense that even though the door ahead has not opened, you are still living, still breathing, still being held, and this truth loosens a very old fear within you. I do not need you to understand this door fully before it opens. I only need you to remain long enough so that when it does open, you do not rush through it like one fleeing, but step through as one who has learned to stand still without being abandoned. There is something I need you to hear very clearly, not as an idea to think about, but as a truth to lean on. You are not someone left behind. You have lived too long with the feeling that you always arrive a step too late, that you stand outside the flow of what is happening, watching others be chosen, called, advanced, while you remain with unnamed gaps. You have called this fate, circumstance, timing that never favored you. But, my child, what you call being left behind, I call being kept. There is a great difference between the two, and that difference lies in my hand, resting on your shoulder at the very moment you think you are standing alone. I do not measure you by speed. I do not view you through milestones others have passed. I see you by the truth of who you are, a truth only I fully know. You have walked through things that, had you gone faster, you would not have survived. You have carried burdens that, had you not stopped at the right time, would have broken you. You are still standing here not because you are slow, but because you were held back so you would not be swept away by rhythms that were never meant for you. When you feel outside, I am standing with you. When you feel displaced, I am calling your name in the silence. When you think you are forgotten, I am protecting you from paths that would cause you to lose yourself. I know this loneliness is quiet. It is not an explosive pain, but a deep cold, a place where you wonder whether anyone truly sees you, whether your effort to remain steady has any meaning when no one speaks affirmation. Yet, my child, there are times when I do not affirm you with words because I am affirming you with presence. As a shepherd lays his hand on an exhausted sheep so it knows it has been found, I lay my hand on you not to push you forward, but to let you know you are not lost. You are not the sheep left behind in the field. You are the sheep carried on the shoulders, because your wounds need healing before you walk on. The identity I am restoring in you in this season is not one who is waiting for a turn, but one who is being kept in order to grow. You have long believed that maturity meant going farther, doing more, carrying heavier loads. I am teaching you a different kind of maturity in remaining without panic, in being held without shame, in accepting that not moving forward yet does not mean you are less. I do not look at you through comparison. I look at you with the gaze of love that knows exactly what you need and how long it takes. And that gaze never abandons you to fate. As this identity begins to be restored, you feel a very gradual warmth, like blood returning to a part of the body that has been numb for too long. You may not fully believe yet, but you no longer recoil as before. You begin to allow yourself deeper breaths, to remain in the present without constantly interrogating where you went wrong. I do not need you to believe everything immediately. I only need you to remain long enough for this truth to soak into you. You are being held by love, not abandoned by circumstance. As this identity settles, something else also comes into view. You have lived too long in a state of false urgency. You became accustomed to deciding quickly, reacting immediately, grasping in time lest you miss out. And you called this responsibility, maturity, alertness. But, my child, there is an urgency that is born of guidance, and there is an urgency born of fear, and it was fear that stole from you the rhythm of life I intended to give. You believed that if you were not urgent, everything would fall apart, without realizing that this very urgency exhausted you to the point where you could no longer hear my voice. I am separating you from that old rhythm, not by forcing everything to slow unnaturally, but by letting you taste a different rhythm, the rhythm of ordered peace. In this rhythm, your heart does not beat from panic, but from life. Your steps are not hurried in order to escape, but steady because you know where you are. You begin to see that many things you thought had to be done immediately never truly required haste at all. They only needed you to be afraid long enough for you to push yourself forward. Looking back, you realize that many decisions were made not because I urged you, but because you could not bear the feeling of waiting. This realization may stir a quiet sense of shame in you, because you see how long you allowed fear to steer. But I do not bring this to you to accuse you. I bring it so that you may be free. You do not need to punish yourself for having lived by the old rhythm. You only need to recognize that you no longer have to live that way. I am not calling you into a life of laziness or stagnation. I am calling you into a life of wakefulness, where each decision is born from inner stillness, not from external noise. And it is precisely within that still space that I invite you to a very small, yes, so small, you might overlook it if you are still waiting for something grander. This yes is not a long leap, not a commitment so heavy it frightens you that you might fail to keep it. It is simply your consent for me to close something that is scattering you. It may be a habit you use to soothe yourself. It may be a connection you hold on to only out of fear of loss. It may be the way you speak to yourself whenever you do not move as fast as you think you should. I am not asking you to release everything. I am only inviting you to place your hand on the latch and allow me to close what you are already ready to let go of, but have not yet dared to admit. I know this moment carries hesitation, because letting go is always bound to fear of loss. But, my child, I do not take away in order to empty you. I close in order to gather you. You have divided yourself into too many pieces trying to keep every door open, and that is what has exhausted you. The yes I invite you to speak is not surrender in defeat, but a very small act of courage, the courage to remain with what is. The courage not to run to another path when your heart grows uneasy. The courage to trust that if I close something, it is because I am holding you, not because I am abandoning you. This yes does not need witnesses. It does not require explanation or declaration. It only needs to be spoken inwardly, gentle enough not to force, honest enough not to pretend. And when you speak this yes, You will not immediately see a great door open, but you will feel a strange kind of peace, like a room growing quieter when a door that never needed to be open is finally shut. That is not a sign that you have gone far, but that you have stood in the right place. There is someone you may have read about, yet perhaps never placed yourself alongside David. In the years when no one spoke his name, not David when he was anointed, not David before Goliath, but David in the open fields where there were no spectators, no applause, only sheep, stones, wind, and long nights without explanation. When the prophet had left, when the oil had dried on his forehead, no door opened immediately for him. He returned to the pasture, to days without recognition, and by human eyes it looked as though he had been forgotten right after being chosen. But my child, David was not forgotten, he was being kept. I kept David from the throne before he was steady enough to carry it without losing his soul. I kept him from public victory so he could learn victory in secret, where no one claps when he faces lions and bears, simply to protect the small thing entrusted to him. No one called that glory, but it was there that I reset his identity, not as one who would become king, but as one who knew me as his shepherd. When he sang in the wilderness, it was not performance, it was the response of someone who knew he was seen even when no one was watching. So it is with you. There are seasons when I anoint you with a very real calling within, and yet I do not bring you into the light immediately, not because I have changed my mind, but because I know that light too soon would train you to live by the gaze of others rather than by my presence. I keep you in the fields of your life so that you do not confuse being chosen with being used. You are not being held back because you are not capable enough. You are being held because I am protecting what I have placed within you from being twisted by the pressure to prove yourself. Like David, you may wonder whether a promise still stands when day after day passes with no visible sign. But my child, a promise does not expire in silence. It takes root there. I do not grow promises through attention. I grow them through faithfulness in small things, where no one records them but me. Your identity, therefore, is not built on where you are standing, but on whom you belong to. You belong to me before you belong to any door that will open later. When you find yourself out of step with others, when your life seems to move more slowly than you expected, remember this. Some of those I have loved most deeply were kept the longest. No one called David king while he was tending sheep, but it was there that he learned to walk without fear of being abandoned, because he knew he was being kept by the one who would lead him forward in due time. This is the identity I am restoring in you, not someone who has lost the rhythm, but someone being kept in the right rhythm. As I reset your identity as one who is kept, I also heal a very deep habit within you, the habit of treating peace as danger. You have grown used to living in constant tension, so much so that when things grow quiet, you become restless, as if something bad must be about to happen. You are accustomed to a racing heart, crowded schedules, immediate responses, instant problem solving, because if you do not move fast, you fear you will be left behind. But my child, I am not one who pulls you by a taut rope. I do not lead you by manufactured urgency. I lead you by ordered peace, where you walk without being shoved, hear without panic, and decide without needing to prove anything. There is another figure I want you to remember, not to memorize, but to recognize yourself in Elijah. After he had poured himself out completely, he did not collapse from lack of power. He collapsed because his body and soul were exhausted. He fled into the wilderness, sat down, and believed he had reached the end. and at the very point where he thought he had been abandoned. I did not shout at him, did not demand that he rise at once, did not command him to be strong. I let him sleep. I fed him. I gave him breath. I restored his rhythm before I gave him his next assignment. My child, this is how I keep those I love. I do not use them until they break. I restore them before I send them. And when Elijah finally arrived at the place where he expected something great, I did not come in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. Those things are loud. They easily provoke fear or excitement. I came in a very gentle whisper. You have heard that story many times, but you may not have allowed it to touch your life. That gentle whisper is not because I am weak, but because I am teaching you to listen with a part of yourself you have long neglected. You learn to hear me in crisis, because crisis silences everything else. But I want you to learn to hear me in order, in the ordinary, in a life no longer driven by manufactured urgency. False urgency often wears a very reasonable disguise. It says, if you don't act now, you will lose. It says, if you don't prove yourself now, you will be dismissed. It says, if you don't respond immediately, you will be forgotten. It convinces you that everything is a last moment, and so you live like someone who never gets to breathe. But my child, not everything urgent is important, and not everything important requires urgency. I am teaching you to discern the difference. I am helping you recognize the rhythm of fear, a racing heart, looping thoughts, a tense body, hurried words, impulsive decisions, and I am teaching you the rhythm of peace, the heart still beating, but with space to breathe, steps still moving, but with weight, words still spoken, but unhurried, decisions still made, but without needing to defeat anyone. You have lived for too long in hurried rhythms that you believed were necessary. You grew accustomed to the feeling that you had to respond immediately. Decide quickly. Prove that you were not slow, not late, not left behind. Those rhythms carried a strange kind of energy. They sharpened you for a moment, but drained you over time. You called it responsibility, initiative, seizing opportunities. But my child, many times it was simply fear wearing the clothes of urgency. I want you to look again at the moments when you were pushed into right now. A late message made your heart beat faster than usual. An invitation followed by the words, "Need a quick response," kept you from sleeping. An opportunity spoken in a pressing tone made you feel that hesitation meant inadequacy. You became accustomed to answering these things by drawing inward, speeding up, and cutting yourself off from your own sense of what was true, just to keep pace with others. You thought you were in control, but in truth, you were being pulled. The hurried rhythm of fear always carries traces of panic. It makes you trade inner truth for a temporary sense of safety. It leads you to answer before your heart is clear, to say yes while you are still unsure, and to remain silent when you need to speak honestly. Afterward, you carry a weight that is difficult to name, as though you stepped away from yourself without finding your way back. I see this not to accuse you, but to teach you how to discern. The steady rhythm of peace is not like that. It does not numb you, but it gives you space to breathe. When something comes from me, you may still feel the pressure of responsibility, still sense the cost of stepping forward. But inside you, there is alignment. You do not force yourself to agree in order to feel calm. You are calm before you agree. You do not cut off your own awareness to keep up. Your awareness is placed at the center of the decision. This is the difference I want you to learn to recognize in your body. Not only in your reasoning, you will notice that this steady rhythm is not loud. It does not need grand language, ultimatums, or appeals to the fear of being left behind. It stands quietly, enduring, and waits for you to become still enough to step into it. There will be times when you try not responding immediately, when you resist reacting out of habit, and you are surprised to find that the world does not collapse. What you feared losing does not disappear overnight. What is truly meant for you does not require you to sell your peace in order to keep it. I know there are moments when you feel ashamed as you realize how long you have lived under false urgency. You look back at decisions made in exhaustion, hunger, and fear, and you wish you had paused. But my child, I do not take you back to the past so that you will condemn yourself. I take you back so that you may be free. When you can name the hurried rhythm of fear, it loses its power over you. You are no longer driven by the demand of right now. Because you have learned to ask a different question: does this carry peace in ordinary life? This may look very small. You read a message and do not answer immediately, though before you would have felt restless. You receive an invitation and allow yourself to sleep on it before deciding. You leave a question open instead of rushing to fill the space. These actions do not make you weaker. They restore your right to be present. You begin to live at your own pace, not to withdraw from others, but so that you do not lose yourself among them. I am separating you from the old rhythm, not through command, but through the truth you have already tasted. You have tasted the cost of living in false urgency, a tense body, a weary mind, a depleted trust. I do not need to persuade you with arguments. Your own experience is teaching you. When you choose the steady rhythm, you are not only choosing a different way of deciding, you are choosing a different way of living. You allow order to return, not rigid order, but the order that comes from peace. And my child, this is what I want you to hold on to. Peace does not always come with ease, but it always comes with truth. When you choose from peace, you may still face difficulty, but you do not face it in fragmentation. You remain whole. You do not need to repair yourself after every choice. I am teaching you this so that your identity is no longer torn apart by hurried decisions. You were not created to live in false urgency. You were created to walk in a steady rhythm, where each yes does not pull you away from yourself. As you begin to see this, there may be a moment of quiet embarrassment, not because you were wrong, but because you realize how long you made yourself tired. But I do not teach you through shame. I teach you through gentleness. I teach you through truth without condemnation. I tell you this, you lived that way because you learned it as a means of survival. And I honor the road you have walked. But I will not leave you in survival mode. I am leading you into a way of living. And this is where the small yes becomes real. That yes is not a dramatic promise, but an agreement in very concrete things, agreeing not to respond immediately when you are tense, agreeing not to return to an old path just to ease the feeling of emptiness, agreeing not to speak to yourself in a harsh voice when you have not yet seen results, agreeing to let me close a source of distraction, a channel that unsettles you within. You fear loss, because you think that if you let go of one thing, you will be left empty. But my child, this is my paradox. You let go in order to receive. You close in order to open. You cease scattering yourself so that you may be made whole. And I do not force you. I do not require you to say yes before you understand everything. I only invite you to place your hand on the latch, to feel the coolness of the metal, to hear the faint sound of the hinge as it shifts, and to recognize that great change often begins with movements almost no one notices. Your yes does not need to be loud. It only needs to be true. If all you can say is a single sentence, let it be as simple as breath itself, I trust. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but to agree to step into the rhythm of peace, where you are held, not abandoned. There is something I am teaching you to recognize in this quiet doorway, and if you do not brush it aside in haste, you will see how real it is. I often touch you with peace before I give you any explanation. You are accustomed to living in the opposite order. You want to understand before you rest. You want reasons before you dare to loosen your grip. But I know that if I waited until you fully understood, you would never truly rest, because your mind does not know how to stop. So I come first, very gently, not with answers, but with a softening in your chest, a quiet settling that even you find surprising because it is not anchored to any circumstance at all. At first, you questioned this peace. You wondered where it came from, whether it was real, whether it was only a fleeting emotional moment before everything became tangled again. You had learned to be wary of good things that arrived too quickly, because you had hoped and been disappointed, trusted and then fallen short. But, my child, my peace does not come to deceive you. It comes to signal that I am near. It does not demand that you believe immediately, nor does it pressure you to make any decision. It is simply there, steady, like a lake settling after the wind has passed, without needing to explain why the wind is gone. There are nights when you go to sleep without carrying a plan, without carrying a problem that must be solved, without carrying the question, what will tomorrow be like? And you sleep deeply, almost strangely so. When you wake, you have no new answers, yet you feel lighter. You may think it is coincidence, that you were simply tired enough to sleep. But my child, that lightness is my language. I let you taste peace first, so you can know that you can be held even when you understand nothing at all. I do this not so you become dependent on feelings, but so you learn to trust my presence more than your own ability to analyze. You once believed that if I truly spoke, I would speak through great signs, clear words, undeniable events. But I know those things often make you more anxious than calm, because when you are overwhelmed, you rush back into control. I choose silence, and within that silence I place in you a peace that does not need defending, does not need arguing, does not require you to stand up and prove anything. This peace comes before reasons, and precisely because of that, it cannot be taken away by reasons that oppose it. As you begin to recognize this sign, you learn a new way of listening. You stop searching for my voice in major events and begin to notice very small shifts in how you respond. You realize that there are things which once made your heart race the moment you thought of them, and now, when you think of them, they still feel heavy, but they do not send you into panic. You notice that some questions are still present, yet they no longer suffocate you as before. This is not because you are stronger, but because I am holding you closer. This silence, therefore, is not emptiness. It is a closeness so near between you and me that I no longer need to speak loudly. And I know that in these moments, your trust begins to grow, not through a grand declaration, but through allowing yourself to soften. You allow yourself not to understand everything. You allow yourself not to resolve everything before resting. You allow yourself to trust that if I have given you peace first, I will give you light when the time comes. This trust is not loud, but it is resilient, because it is not built on information, but on the lived experience of being held. When this peace has rested on you long enough, I begin another work, very gentle, yet very real. You do not fear silence because it is empty. You fear silence because there is nowhere to hide within it. When noise recedes, you no longer have busyness to escape into, no tasks to lean on, no story to tell yourself to avoid touching the truth. You had grown used to using motion to cover feeling, busyness to mask exhaustion, planning to avoid sitting with vulnerability. And when I draw back the noise, you feel exposed, as though every temporary protection has disappeared at once. I do not do this abruptly. I do not pull the ground out from under you. I remove layers one by one, so gently that at first you barely notice. One conversation fades. A schedule suddenly loosens. An old excitement no longer holds you as it once did. You think it is boredom, emptiness, a loss of fire, but my child, I am reducing the interference so you can hear what you have avoided for too long. I am not taking away. I am restoring quiet so you can face what is real. You will remember moments when you tried to fill the silence with small but constant actions. You reached for your phone not because you needed it, but because you did not want to sit with the feeling rising inside. You turned on music, noise, something, anything to avoid hearing your own heartbeat. You blamed yourself for weakness when tears arrived unannounced. But I do not see that as weakness. I see it as the moment your defenses grow tired and truth finally has room to stand. Silence reveals very human fears, the fear of not being enough if you are not doing something, the fear of not being loved if you are not useful, the fear of being forgotten if you are not constantly present. These fears are not new, but they only hold power when you do not look at them directly. I bring you into silence so you can see them, not so you drown in them, but so they lose their authority. What is named no longer manipulates from the dark. There are times when you resist. You tell yourself you are just resting, just slowing down for a while, just needing time. But beneath those words, you know something is being asked of you, honesty. Honesty about how tired you truly are. Honesty about the expectations you have carried for too long. Honesty about the roles you have played to feel safe. I do not need you to confess these things to others. I need you to stop hiding them from me. I do not remove noise to isolate you from life. I remove noise to separate you from panic. Panic is the loudest thing of all, even when it makes no sound. It runs through your mind in scenarios, in what-ifs, in unanswered questions. It convinces you that thinking more means preparing better. But, my child, panic does not prepare, it erodes. It makes you react instead of respond. Choose quickly instead of choose truly. So I bring you back to what is basic, the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of steps, the rhythm of a day that is enough. I teach you to sit with a feeling without fixing it immediately. I teach you to let a question remain without rushing to answer it. I teach you to do one small thing and do it fully without scattering, without adding more. These lessons do not look spiritual, but they reset your foundation. A foundation not built on stimulation, but on presence. You will notice this change in your body before you see it in your thoughts. You sleep more deeply, even though the problem is unresolved. You sigh less. Your shoulders drop. You no longer startle at every small noise of life. This is not avoidance. It is your nervous system being brought back into order. I am healing you slowly, because quick healing only hides symptoms. I want you healed at the root. In that silence, you begin to hear another voice, one that does not push, threaten, or bargain. It does not say much. It simply reminds you of something very real: you are here. And that is enough for this moment. You do not need to prove your worth through speed. You do not need to manufacture meaning immediately. You do not need to force understanding before you live. I do not abandon you in silence. I am there, so that silence no longer becomes your enemy. And, my child, as the noise recedes, you also begin to hear what you truly want to say, not what keeps others comfortable, but what keeps you true. There were apologies you offered out of fear of being left. There were yeses you spoke to preserve peace. Silence gives you the space to recognize this without condemning yourself. I do not need you to fix everything at once. I need you to see. I know there are moments when you fear that if the silence lasts too long, you will lose motivation, lose direction, lose yourself. But my child, it is precisely in the silence that you are finding yourself again, not a polished version, but the real one. I am not cutting you off from life. I am cutting you off from panic so that you can live that life without being crushed by it. When you come out of the silence, you do not emerge as someone lacking. You emerge as someone who has been reset. I am reducing the noise around you, not because you are too busy, but because you have been using busyness as a way to avoid. You have allowed too many sounds to fill the empty spaces, not only external noise, but also the voices in your head, the speculations, the imagined scenarios, the self-accusations, the rehearsed conversations. You thought you needed them to prepare, to protect yourself. But my child, that much noise does not protect you. It exhausts you. When I begin to strip it away, you feel exposed. You resist inwardly, telling yourself that you are only being responsible, that if you do not think this much, you will miss something important. But I do not remove the noise to make you deficient. I remove it so you will have the courage to hear what you have been avoiding for so long. As the noise settles, you begin to hear the grief you never gave yourself time to feel, the weariness you always brushed aside with, "I'm fine," and the very real longing to rest that you once labeled as weakness. There are moments when you sit still, with nothing left to distract you, and tears come without a clear reason. Do not rush to wipe them away. My child, they are not a sign of weakness. They are a sign that you are no longer bracing yourself. I do not make you cry to hurt you. I let you cry to lighten you. Those tears carry fears that have been compressed for too long. And as they fall, you realize you no longer have to maintain the image of being strong. I am there, not speaking, not explaining, simply holding you in that deeply human moment. And I need you to hear this clearly. I am not cutting you off from your life. I am not calling you to escape responsibility, nor pulling you away from your work, your family, the things you carry. I am only cutting you off from the frantic pace that has clung to everything you do. You have done too many things in a state of tension, and so even when you finished, it never felt enough. I am drawing you out of that rhythm so you can return to life with a different one, the rhythm of someone who knows where they are anchored. You are like a boat that has dropped anchor, not to remain motionless forever, but to avoid being swept away when the wind rises. An anchor does not take away your freedom. It gives you a point of stability so you do not panic. As your breathing evens out, as you do one small thing and do it fully without scattering, without running in 10 directions at once, you begin to see light. Not the light of a dramatic turning point, but the light of full presence in what you are doing. I am there. In every breath you recover, in every slowing of your hands, in every decision, no longer driven by the fear of being left behind. My child, this silence is the language I use to draw you near, so near that I do not need to raise my voice. When you are that close, you will no longer fear that, if I do not speak, I have gone away. You will know that precisely when I am silent, I am doing something very deep, healing the way you live, the way you listen, the way you remain in life without being ruled by panic. And from that place, when I do speak, you will hear not with tension, but with a heart smoothed like a lake after the wind has passed. There is a very ordinary moment I want you to notice, not because it is special, but because it shows that silence has begun to become your foundation. It is when you do a very small thing, washing a cup, folding a shirt, answering an email, stepping outside to breathe without pushing yourself to go faster, without opening another screen, without thinking 3 steps ahead. For the first time in a long while, you are fully there. Not because you are practicing mindfulness, not because you are concentrating to do it right, but because the frantic pressure is no longer inside you. Your breath is steady, your shoulders drop, and you do not have to remind yourself to calm down. Peace has already arrived and stayed, like solid ground on which you now stand to live. You once feared that if silence lasted, you would fall behind, be forgotten, fail to keep pace with life. But my child, this silence does not slow you down. It brings you into rhythm, like an anchor that keeps a boat from being dragged when the current shifts. Silence keeps you from being yanked around by false urgencies, so that when you step, each step carries weight. I am not cutting you off from responsibility. I am cutting you off from the panic that clings to it. And when panic leaves, you do the same work, but it no longer drains you dry. You will notice another sign: you no longer need to explain yourself so much, even to yourself. Before, every decision was followed by justification, defense, preparation for being misunderstood. Now, you find you can do what is right without building fences around it, not because you have become hardened, but because you are anchored in a truth stronger than others' opinions. That truth is quiet, it does not argue. It is simply there, close enough to lean on, calm enough that you do not have to prove it. I know there are still moments when you fear being left behind. That feeling does not vanish just because you have touched peace. But when it comes now, it no longer rules you. It passes like a breeze, and you realize you are still standing. You breathe steadily. You do not chase it away, nor cling to it to analyze. You let it pass. And that is the sign that silence has done its work. It has taught you to remain without panic. You do not need an immediate answer to keep going. You need a foundation strong enough to wait for the right time. There are mornings when you wake without any great surge of motivation. Before, that would have alarmed you. You would have thought you were losing momentum. Now you recognize it is not emptiness, it is stillness. In that stillness, you do what needs to be done, one task at a time, no more, no less. And strangely, at the end of the day, you are not as exhausted as before, not because you did less, but because you were not pulled away from yourself while doing it. I am there, in that steady rhythm, without needing to speak for you to know. This silence also teaches you something subtle. Not every thought needs an answer. Some thoughts only need to be seen and then set down. You once believed you had to resolve every question in order to be at peace. But I give you the opposite experience when you are at peace. Many questions simply fall away, like a lake becoming still. Small ripples settle without a hand stirring them. You do not make this happen through effort. It happens because you have stayed near me long enough for my rhythm to seep into yours. And as you live in that rhythm, you begin to believe differently, not because you have gained new evidence, but because you have been held through hours without evidence. That faith does not need slogans or declarations. It shows itself in the way you choose not to react too quickly, in the way you allow yourself a little more sleep when you need it, in the way you complete one small task instead of opening many others. I do not need you to do great things to prove anything. I delight in seeing you live rightly. My child, silence is the language I use to draw you close. And when you are this near, you will no longer confuse silence with absence. You will know that I am here, not at the end of an explanation, but at the beginning of a peaceful breath. From that ground, you will hear me when I speak, and you will also recognize me even when I do not. This is the freedom I desire to give you, freedom from panic, freedom to live fully, freedom to move forward without being pulled by the fear of being left behind. There is a way you sometimes turn back without even realizing it. You return through memories that have been softened. You remember the sweet moments, the easier stretches, the times you were seen and comforted, and without meaning to, you let those memories cast a golden light over the entire old path. My child, I do not fault you for this. It is how a weary heart seeks shelter. But I know that if you remember only what was sweet, you will repaint the darkness with selective brightness. And you will return not because that way was right, but because you cannot bear the emptiness of standing still. So I place truth like a lamp, not harsh, not condemning, but only bright enough for you to see the whole picture you once cropped. This lamp does not come to erase memory, it comes to put memory in its proper place. When the light turns on, you do not only see yesterday's smiles, you also see the cost you paid to keep them. You see the times you swallowed your words, the nights you convinced yourself you were fine, the mornings you woke with a nameless exhaustion. You see what you sacrificed for temporary peace, how tightly you strained to keep harmony, how often you stayed silent so you would not be disliked. My child, my light does not wound you by truth. You ache because you lived too long without allowing yourself to look straight at it. There will be a moment when you want to turn the light off, not because you do not understand, but because truth leaves you no comfortable way back. Regret rises, then grief, then a very clear awakening. You realize that if you were to return, you would return to the entire picture, not just the beautiful parts. That light pushes darkness back, not by force, but by refusing to let darkness disguise itself as fond memory. And when the darkness retreats, you no longer need to persuade yourself. You grow stronger by truth, not by justification. I know this light is not easy. It requires you to stand still long enough to look, to not skim past, not rush to label it already over. But my child, when you see fully, memory no longer pulls you unconsciously. You do not need to promise yourself you will not return. The light has already done that work. You stand more firmly, not because you have hardened, but because you are no longer deceived by softened fragments. You often think I close doors because you have done something wrong. But most of the time I close them because you have seen enough that you can no longer go back and remain whole. You may return with your body, but you cannot return with your eyes. Once you have seen the full truth, beautiful memories no longer have the strength to conceal their real cost. I do not keep you from returning because I am strict, but because I will not allow you to blind yourself again. There are doors that are not closed with bolts, but with light. When light is on, darkness no longer has the power to hide its shape. You once remembered old days with selective tenderness, a smile, a sense of being needed, a moment that felt like peace. But you forgot the price, the times you shrank to fit, the times you swallowed truth to keep harmony, the nights you lay still while your heart screamed. I placed the lamp so you can see the whole landscape, not to hurt you, but so you will stop convincing yourself that darkness was ever home. Truth does not shout. It does not seize you. It stands there, steady, waiting for you to be brave enough to look. And when you do, a very particular pain occurs, the pain of no longer being able to return innocently. You grieve the naivety, the feeling of not knowing. But my child, I am not calling you back to innocence. I am calling you into maturity. Maturity does not steal joy. It simply cuts illusion. You begin to realize that many things you called old doors were actually soft cords. They did not bind you by force, but by habit. The habit of apologizing for yourself. The habit of over-explaining to be accepted. The habit of minimizing real needs to avoid conflict. These cords did not hurt you immediately. They wore you down slowly. I closed the way back so you will not continue living from exhaustion and calling it peace. At times you feel constrained because the door closes without ceremony, without a grand explanation. You want a reason large enough to persuade your own heart. But I know that if I gave you reasons, you would use them to negotiate one more return. So I give you truth instead of argument. Truth does not negotiate. It simply stands there clear enough that you cannot deceive yourself again. I see you retype an old message and then delete it. I see you stand before a familiar place and turn away. I see you open a memory and close it more quickly than before. That is not failure. It is evidence that I am closing the door through your own new choices. You no longer need me to lock it from the outside. You are learning not to grasp the handle. Closing a door is not dramatic. It is a series of very small, very quiet no's. And my child, what hurts most is not losing the old door, but losing the old version of yourself, the version always willing to endure in order to be loved, the version that believed if you tried a little harder, everything would be okay, the version accustomed to living on thin hope. I did not close the door to punish that version. I closed it to free you from it. You were not born to live by cords. There will be days when you feel empty after the door closes, not because I took too much, but because the cords that once occupied space have fallen away. That emptiness frightens you. You want to fill it with what is familiar, but I invite you to stay still in that space for a while. Emptiness is not loss. It is room for you to be set again, without being pulled back into an old shape. I do not push you forward by fear. I keep you here by truth. And this is the truth you must hear clearly if you were to return now. You would have to split yourself, one part knowing the truth, the other pretending not to. I will not allow you to live in two rhythms anymore. I close the door so you can be whole. Wholeness may be lonely for a time, but it does not tear you further. And there will come a day when you look back and see that the door did not close to end something, but to end repetition. I did not take away your past. I took away its control. Once the light is on, you no longer need to fear the darkness returning. It may knock, but it no longer holds the key. When the light of truth has been turned on, I do one more thing. I close not to punish, but to cut the cords that have bound you to an old version of yourself. These cords are not always visible. They hide within very human needs. The need for recognition keeps you lingering longer than what is right. The habit of apologizing for your own existence causes you to shrink in order to keep the peace. The fear of being disliked makes you adjust your tone. Choose your words carefully. Trim your truth to fit the comfort of others. My child, I do not despise these needs. I simply no longer allow them to steer your life. When I close, you feel constrained. You are used to keeping a few cords just in case. And when they are cut, you lose the sense of control. You feel more exposed, no longer able to pull on familiar knots to return to a false sense of safety. Yet it is precisely in that constriction that you begin to recognize each cord. You find yourself typing a message to explain, then deleting it, typing again, then deleting it because you realize you do not need to apologize in order to exist. You catch yourself about to return to an old conversation just to feel needed, and you stop because you recognize that this need is costing you yourself. The pain that comes when a cord is cut is not because the cord was precious, but because it wrapped around you for so long. There are moments when you feel empty, strange, as though you have lost a part of yourself. But my child, this is not loss, it is recovery. Each cord that falls opens a space to breathe. You grow lighter not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer dragging an old version of yourself into the present. Small freedoms begin to appear in very ordinary choices. You say no without lengthy explanations. You pause without self-reproach. You choose what is right for you, even when there is no applause. I close so that you no longer live by cords, not so that you become isolated. When you are no longer bound, you connect through truth, not through fear. You stay because you choose to, not because you need validation. And my child, any relationship that cannot endure you, standing upright was leaning on cords, not on love. So that truth does not merely flash on and fade. I teach you something very simple. Name the way back. Not to shame yourself, not to condemn, but so you are not pulled unconsciously. You do not need a long analysis. You only need a short phrase, 2 to 4 words, honest enough for you to recognize. When you name it, you place a marker between yourself and the old habit. That marker does not block you by force. It helps you stop through clarity. At first, you feel unsure. You are not certain what to call it, because naming is an admission. Then it becomes clearer, seeking attention, fear of abandonment, grabbing quick peace, avoiding conflict. You may feel embarrassed naming it, as though exposing a weakness. But my child, courage is not the absence of weakness. Courage is looking straight at it without running. When you name it, you remove the old signpost. You do not need to destroy that road. You simply no longer let it lead you. There are moments when the impulse comes very quickly. Before, you were already there, already returned before you even noticed. Now you notice sooner. You quietly say within yourself the short sentence, I teach you, Lord. I see. Nothing more is needed. That sentence is not magic, it is presence. When you say, I see, the light turns on, the cord is revealed, and you gain a breath in which to choose. Even a single breath is enough to keep you from being pulled. And when you do not turn back, you do not need to praise yourself. You simply remain with the peace that arrives, quiet peace, unshowy peace. You realize you have lost nothing. On the contrary, you are more whole. You understand that I closed not to deprive you, but to protect you from deceiving yourself through softened memories. Truth has done its work. It does not force. It does not threaten. It simply shines. My child, when you live with the light of truth, with cords that have been cut, and with the short names you dare to admit, the door back loses its pull. You do not need to hate the past, you only need to see it fully. And in that full seeing, You stand upright and grow stronger, not because you have hardened, but because you are no longer dragged by what you now see clearly. There is something you have believed for a long time that I need you to release. You thought you were strong because you never stopped. You became accustomed to enduring, to bracing yourself, to moving forward even when something within you was torn. You called that resilience, responsibility, the refusal to be weak. But my child, wounds do not heal while running. They are only prolonged, scraped deeper, until one day they bleed in ways you did not expect. I've seen you smile with others while you still had strength during the day, and collapse at night. You blamed yourself for moments of fatigue, for days when you did not want to speak, for mornings when you had to force yourself out of bed as though nothing had happened. You believed that if you stopped, everything would fall apart. People would leave. Opportunities would pass you by. But my child, what quietly collapsed was you, little by little, each time you ignored the signal of pain in order to keep enduring. That is why I let you stop, not as punishment, but as healing. I do not call you to stop so that you fall behind. I call you to stop so that you may be bandaged. Clean water must be poured over a wound before it is wrapped, and that water may sting at first, but without it the wound will infect. I cleanse the places where you grew accustomed to enduring without allowing yourself care. I bind the tears you dismissed as small things because you no longer had the strength to name them. When you stop, you may feel weaker, but that is only because you are no longer using strength to conceal pain. You are comforted not by grand words, but by a very real permission to be unwell without shame. I am there, not urging you to stand up, not asking when you will be ready, only keeping you from tearing further. And in being kept, you begin to recover quietly, slowly, but truly. There are moments when you do not realize you are hungry, because you have learned to call that hunger by other names, needing an immediate answer, needing someone to stay, needing a sign to feel safe. You think you are reasoning rationally, but in truth your heart is empty, and when the heart is hungry, it reaches for anything that resembles fullness, even if the price is the very thing I planted in you long ago. In those moments, I keep you from deciding while your heart is trembling, not because I want to control you, but because I know decisions born of hunger often pull you back to old paths. You may call them safe choices, practical choices. At least this is something. But I see clearly you are trading something deeper for a temporary sensation, like one who sells their inheritance for a single hot meal. You think you are satisfied, yet the emptiness returns, deeper than before. I am not ashamed of you for this. I show it to you only so that you will stop condemning yourself. That hunger does not say you are weak. It says you have walked far without being nourished. That is why I hold you until your heart is peaceful enough to choose, not choosing to fill a void, but choosing because you have already been filled. When peace comes before reasons, you will see clearly many decisions that once felt urgent no longer hold the same pull. You are not being deprived of choice. You are being protected from choices born out of lack. In this being held, you begin to notice something very small yet very real. You can wait, not waiting in anxiety, but waiting in gratitude. You are grateful that I did not let you sign your name to decisions you would have had to carry like a long, open wound. I hold you not to delay your life, but to keep your life from being shaped by momentary hunger. There is a space where you are standing now, not behind, and not yet ahead, and you have often wondered why I have kept you there for so long. You are no longer the old person who could return to life as before. but you have not yet laid your hands on the new thing to name it. That in-between leaves you feeling exposed, because it offers no clear role to hide within. You cannot use achievement to prove that you are fine, nor can you use suffering to ask for more time. You are left only with truth, opening layer by layer, slowly, leaving you no place to escape. I call this space a threshold, and I know standing there is wearying. Winds from the old side blow toward you, carrying familiar words and survival patterns that once kept you going, while the front remains quiet, no promises yet, no clear outlines. You are pulled between two directions, and in that tension, what you fear most is not failure, but being misunderstood. You are used to being recognized through labels, roles, through what you were becoming. In this in-between, no one knows what to call you, and neither do you. But my child, it is precisely because there is no role left to hide in that you learn how to stand in truth. I do not use this in-between to weaken you. I use it to strengthen you deeply. When you are misunderstood yet still choose to live rightly without defending yourself, without reshaping the story to make it easier for others to accept you, are growing at a level praise cannot reach, and criticism can no longer wound deeply. You no longer need agreement to know you are walking rightly, because I am holding you here, even when no one else sees. You will notice a subtle change. You explain less, not because you have closed yourself off, but because you no longer need to convince. There are moments when you are misunderstood, and the old reflex urges you to correct immediately, to say everything, to reclaim your image. But I hold you in that silence, not so that you lose out, but so that you learn to trust that truth does not need to shout in order to exist. When you do not defend yourself, you are allowing me to do my work. This in-between also teaches you patience in a new way. Not the patience of gritting your teeth and enduring, but the patience of staying with yourself when there is no outcome yet to hold on to. You learn how to live days without milestones, without clear signs, without immediate answers. And in those very days, you discover a deeper peace, one that does not depend on whether anyone affirms you today or not. That peace is quiet, unshowy, but it keeps you steady while everything else is still shifting. You once thought you were strong because you never stopped. You were used to pushing through by suppressing pain, smiling, and moving on as though wounds would dry on their own if you just walked faster. But my child, wounds do not heal while running. They only retreat deeper, waiting for a moment when you are weaker to surface again. I let you stop not so that you would lose, but so that you would stop bleeding with every step forward. When your heart is hungry, it is very easy to misidentify voices. Hunger for recognition makes you reach quickly for a glance. Hunger for safety makes you cling to an agreement. Hunger for approval makes you say yes to what you know will diminish you. I hold you back in those moments not because I am slow, but because I am kind. I know that decisions made in hunger often carry debts into tomorrow, the debt of regret, the debt of having to return and piece yourself back together. You feel ashamed when you realize this, because you want to believe you are more self-possessed than that. You do not like seeing yourself exposed, having your hunger named. But I do not name it to weaken you. I name it to free you. When you know you are hungry, you no longer have to eat whatever is placed in front of you. You can wait. And waiting does not make you lesser. It keeps you from selling the deepest part of yourself. I remember an old story you once heard, a man who sold his birthright simply because he was hungry. Not because he did not understand its value, but because hunger narrowed his vision until the present moment became everything. I remind you of this not to moralize, but to help you see yourself. How many times have you traded what is lasting for a bowl that only filled you briefly? How many times have you signed a compromise just to relieve discomfort for a moment? I am holding you now so that you do not repeat that pattern. The in-between you are standing in offers no role to hide behind. You are no longer called by your old name, and you have not yet stepped into the new one. This leaves you disoriented. You cannot lean on results to prove yourself, nor on the past to comfort yourself. You are left with the bare truth of staying, and it is here that I shape in you a kind of endurance that praise can never produce. In this in-between, you learn to live rightly even when no one understands. You are misunderstood and do not rush to correct. You are labeled and do not rush to remove it. You learn to stand upright without armor. This is difficult, because you were used to living by being placed correctly in the eyes of others. But I am placing you somewhere else now, a place where you stand before me without a role. There are days when you feel as though you have been standing at the threshold for a very long time, neither advancing nor retreating. You fear that you are stuck. But my child, you are not stuck. You are being held. Being held is not restraint, it is protection. I am protecting you from tearing further, from making decisions while exhausted, from calling escape progress. I hold you so that when you step forward, you step with your whole self. This in-between teaches you something very quiet, yet very deep. You do not need to be understood immediately in order to live truthfully. You do not need immediate validation in order to remain faithful. You do not need a role to have worth. When old shelters fall away, you stand exposed, and I stand with you. No stage lights, no applause, only truth and steady breath. Here, you learn endurance, and one day, you will realize this. The in-between itself has strengthened you in a way that makes no noise. You no longer react as before. You are no longer pulled by old hungers. You can stay with discomfort without rushing to fill it. That is a sign of healing. And when you are healed, you do not need to run to prove yourself. You can walk in order to live. I know there are moments when you feel alone in this in-between space, because you cannot fully share with others what you are experiencing. But, my child, you are not here by yourself. I am standing with you at the threshold, neither pushing you to hurry forward nor pulling you back. I am simply holding you, so that when you do step ahead, you will not move as one fleeing the past, but as one who has been made firm from the inside. The in-between is not a place of being stuck, it is where endurance is formed, so that when the new door opens, you enter without carrying the torn fragments of former days. There is something I want you to sense again, not with your thoughts, but with your whole body. I have placed you on solid rock. This is not something I began doing today. I have been doing it since the days when you were still struggling to find your footing under so many watching eyes. You were once very sensitive, easily lifted by praise, easily shaken by disapproval. You learned to read the room, measure the wind, adjust yourself to fit, and you called that wisdom. But, my child, living that way is exhausting, because each day you must prove that you still deserve to remain. I did not build you on praise, only to have you tremble when it falls silent. Nor did I build you on criticism, forcing you to brace yourself in constant defense. I placed you on rock, a place where the wind may come and you do not need to build another wall to protect yourself. Standing on that foundation, you still feel, still ache when it is right to ache, still tremble before what is beautiful. But you are no longer thrown down by the gusts of opinion. You do not become numb, you become steady. You will notice that this steadiness does not arrive as a surge of excitement. It comes quietly, like standing upright without reminding yourself to stand. You no longer need to ask every day whether you are right or wrong based solely on how others respond. There will be days when you do what is right and no one applauds. Yet you return home with a lightness in your chest. That is the sign you are standing on a foundation that does not shift. I have placed you there, and you do not need to keep checking whether the ground is still firm. On this rock, I invite you into something that may sound counterintuitive: rest. Not rest as neglect, not rest as escape, but rest as courage. The courage to trust that I am working even when you are not. The courage to lay burdens down without fearing that everything will collapse. You have long believed that if you loosen your grip, things will fall apart, because you have carried too much alone. But, my child, there are burdens that were never meant for your hands. You held them only because fear taught you to. I am not taking away your daily faithfulness. You still do what needs to be done. Still take small steps. Still keep what I have entrusted to you. But I am asking you to stop doing my part. Stop carrying outcomes you cannot control. Stop staying awake late to review every possible scenario. Stop believing that if you do not think enough, something bad will surely happen. Rest is when you place these things down and say, without grand words, I trust that you are at work. At first, you may be afraid that if you do not check, do not remind yourself, do not prepare more, you will be careless. But you will slowly discover something very practical. The world does not collapse when you sleep a full night. Your work does not unravel when you begin the morning without urgently reviewing everything. On the contrary, you find yourself clearer, more awake, and your decisions are no longer stained with panic. Resting while still moving forward, that is my paradox. And you are learning it through your own body. And in this rest, I want you to know something even more personal. I am in your house, not only in the living room where you receive others, but in every hallway, every hidden corner, every room you once locked to cry in. There were moments when you leaned your back against a closed door, slid down to the floor, breathing hard because there was no one left to perform strength for. I was there. I did not wait outside until you were composed. I was there from the beginning, even when you felt ashamed of yourself. You once feared that if I saw everything, I would turn away. But, my child, there is no corner of your life that surprises or disappoints me. I know the places where you feel most alone, the thoughts you dare not speak, the tears you wipe away quickly for fear of being heard. I am not ashamed of you, and I do not love a revised version of you. I place my hand on each of those places, not to interrogate, but to remain with you. My presence does not cause you to shrink, it allows you to soften. When you know that I am in your house like this, rest is no longer a distant idea. It becomes the feeling of being at home within your own life. You do not need to run outward to find shelter, nor build another layer of strength to cover what is tender. You stay. You are held. You are set on rock. You are allowed to rest without being abandoned. And from there, you will move on, not because you have become perfectly ready, but because you have been held long enough to stop tearing. There is a kind of courage you were never taught, and I am leading you into it gently, the courage to rest without justification. You have lived so long needing to prove, to explain why you stopped, why you slowed, why you no longer do what you once did. You feared that without convincing reasons, others would misunderstand and leave you behind. But, my child, true rest needs no permission except mine. It does not need to be rationalized or neatly presented. It only needs to be trusted. I have seen you lay burdens down and then pick them back up, not because they were light, but because you feared that without carrying them, you would lose value. You equated your presence with busyness and your faithfulness with exhaustion. But I do not measure you by the hours you stay awake. I look at the truth of your heart when you let go. When you dare to trust that I am working even when you are not. You step into a freedom you once thought was a luxury. The rest I give does not make you passive. It restores order. You do your part, the small, clear, faithful things, and you leave the rest to me. Yet you will find that the hardest thing is not letting go of big tasks, but releasing the need to control your sense of safety. You learn to create safety by gripping tightly, by preparing endlessly, by imagining every possible outcome. When I invite you to rest, I am inviting you to trust that true safety does not come from thinking enough, but from being held. There may come a very ordinary morning, with no special sign, when you realize you are no longer opening everything at once as you used to. You do not rush to check, to measure, to prepare for what has not yet arrived. You make a cup of water, stand still for a moment, and you do not feel that you are wasting time. That moment is small, but it speaks of something large you are trusting, not blindly, but with a body that has grown tired and has finally been given permission to rest. And when you rest in this way, I do what you cannot do. I adjust what you cannot see. I guard the doors you cannot watch. You do not need to know how I work. You only need to know that I never stop working. Your rest does not slow me down. It gives me space to act without being pulled back into the old rhythm of fear. When you lay the burden down, I lift it exactly where it needs to be lifted. You will slowly understand that rest is not a reward after everything is finished, but the ground from which things are done rightly. Not resting because you are already perfect, but resting so you are not crushed before you arrive. I do not take your path away from you. I give you a foundation firm enough to walk without having to patch yourself together as you go. And on that foundation, you do not lose momentum. You recover yourself as you move forward. There is a hesitation you carry very deep, so deep that you rarely name it, the fear of being fully exposed. Not exposed before others, but exposed before me. You have grown used to tidying the surface, opening only doors that are bright enough, orderly enough, respectable enough, while the narrow corridors and the rooms where you once cried until your breath gave out, you have locked very carefully. You fear that if I enter there, I will see you weaker than you want to admit, more tired than you allow yourself to be, more tangled than you ever permitted yourself to feel. But my child, I was already there before you ever managed to lock the door. I am in your house not as a guest who must be invited at the right moment, but as the one who laid every brick. I know the corners you avoid not out of curiosity, but out of love. I know the room where you once leaned your back against the locked door, slid down to the floor, breathed shallowly, and held back sobs so no one would hear. I know the hallway you pass through every day without daring to stop, because stopping would let the tears spill over. I know the window where you stood looking out, wondering when everything would finally grow lighter. There is nowhere I have not entered, and nowhere I enter to shame you. You once thought rest would come when everything in your house was finally in order, when you were stable enough for me to stay. But true rest begins when you stop cleaning in front of me, when you let me see the house as it is with its cluttered spaces, its wounds not yet healed, its fragments of memory you do not yet know where to place. I do not come to inspect, I come to remain. My presence does not force you to be strong at once. It allows you to soften without falling apart. There is a very small moment, perhaps you have known it without naming it, when you close the door. Lean back. And for the first time, do not force yourself to stand upright anymore. You breathe out more deeply. And in that breath, you stop performing. I am there. No grand words. No blinding light. Just a hand resting on your shoulder. Heavy enough for you to know you no longer have to hold yourself together, alone. You melt not because you are weak, but because you are safe. That is the rest I give, not through distant promises, but through nearness. When you know that I am in your house like this, the identity of being held is no longer an idea you repeat for comfort. It becomes a way of living. You no longer have to leave your home to seek shelter in work, in relationships, in pleasing others. You remain even when emotions are still tangled. You no longer need to hide the places you were once most ashamed of, because you know I do not leave when you open the door. That warmth does not weaken you. It makes you strong enough to stop building unnecessary armor. And from that place of being held, rest spreads into the smallest rhythms of life. You sleep more deeply, not because every question has been answered, but because you no longer have to keep watch alone through the night. You enter the new day with a strange lightness, not excitement, not noise, but enough that you are not dragged back into the old pace. You do the work that needs doing. Say what needs to be said. And when silence is needed, you are silent without feeling diminished. You do not need to prove that you are okay. You are being held. And that is enough. My child, I do not only place you on solid rock so you can stand firm against the wind. I dwell within your house so you know that even when the wind blows, you still have a place to return to without having to edit yourself. True rest does not pull you out of life. It sends you into life with an anchored identity. And from that identity, your new way of walking will not be loud, not rushed, not performative, but it will endure, because it begins from the place where you have been fully held. There is something I need you to learn again, because you have confused it for a long time. Not everything that pressures you comes from me. You have lived through enough seasons of scrambling that you began to believe urgency itself was a sign of timing. You hear an invitation, see an opportunity, face a choice, and your heart immediately races. Your breath shortens. Your mind fills with if-then scenarios. You call it can't miss this. But my child, look more closely at that feeling. It throws you into panic. It does not bring you clarity. I do not deny that what I lead can sometimes be urgent. There are moments that require courage, decision, a step out of the familiar. But what comes from me, even when it is urgent, does not push you into chaos. It does not force you to react in fear. It carries with it a strange peace, not to make things easy, but to keep you from losing yourself while choosing. You may tremble, but you do not unravel. You may feel small, but you are not scattered. That is the difference I want you to recognize. Remember the times you lost sleep over a certain invitation, not because you desired it too much, but because there was a voice inside pressing you. If you do not accept now, you will fall behind. If you do not say yes, you will be forgotten. If you refuse, you will lose your worth. That pressure made you shrink inward, made you feel you had to rescue the opportunity yourself. My child, what drives you into that kind of panic usually does not come from me. I do not lead you by suffocating your breath. And then there are other invitations, other steps that make you tremble in a different way, not trembling from fear of loss, but trembling because you know you are stepping into something beyond your own strength. You feel small. You feel your need for me, and strangely, there is peace. Not peace because everything is clear, but peace because you do not have to carry it alone. This is the peace Scripture calls the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. That peace does not require you to understand everything. It guards your heart, so you do not break as you step forward. I want you to begin examining your inner rhythm when you stand under pressure. The rhythm that comes from me does not rush you into trading yourself away. It may urge, but it does not yank. It calls you forward, but it does not drag you by fear. When you face something and your first sensation is panic, the need to prove yourself, the rush driven by fear of being late, pause for a moment, not to refuse, but to discern. I do not need you fast. I need you true. You will feel a very real lightness as you begin to recognize this. You no longer have to react to every invitation as though it were the last train leaving the station. You no longer have to force a decision in the middle of the night just because you fear the opportunity will be gone by morning. When you allow yourself to check the rhythm, much pressure falls away, not because you have grown stronger, but because it was never rooted in me and what truly comes from me, even if you do not take it immediately, does not disappear overnight. My child, I do not lead you by disorienting you. I lead you by restoring order within. When you learn to distinguish between pressure and peace, you are not merely avoiding wrong decisions, you begin to live differently. You are no longer pulled by the noise outside, but anchored by a rhythm within. That rhythm is not loud or showy, yet it is steady enough to keep you from being swept away whenever life accelerates. My child, holy timing does not compete for your attention through panic. It waits for you in truth. It gives you enough peace to say yes without losing yourself, and enough freedom to say not yet without shame. When you learn to discern false urgency from the timing I appoint, you stop running after life. You begin to walk, and each step, though slow, is placed on solid ground. You have walked long enough through spaces where no one applauded you. There were no clear signs to tell you whether you were moving forward or standing still. No praise to lean on and reassure yourself that you were doing fine. And it is precisely there that a very real question surfaced within you. Even if you never spoke it aloud, if I am not opening the way ahead, and I am also closing the way back, then where are you standing in this story? Hear me clearly. You are standing in my arms, not in a void. You thought silence meant absence, but my silence is not withdrawal. It is presence without noise. I am so near that you no longer hear my footsteps. I am so close that I do not need to call your name with sound. The steadiness of your breath is already a sign that I am here. You did not immediately notice that what was changing was not the circumstances, but the way you were standing within them. The external things may not yet have shifted as you once hoped, but inside you, a different order is taking shape. You no longer react as before. What once sent you into a rush now causes you to pause, not because you have grown numb, but because you are no longer pulled by the same force. I see you beginning to recognize a subtle but crucial difference between enduring and remaining. Before, you endured by clenching your teeth, suppressing your feelings, telling yourself to push just a little longer. Now, you remain by allowing yourself to feel without judgment, allowing questions to exist without immediate answers, allowing a day to pass without assigning it grand meaning. This once frightened you because you were accustomed to living by intensity. But I am teaching you to live by depth. You once believed that if you did not move forward, you would fall behind. But my child, there are times when not moving is precisely how I keep you from going in circles. I do not lead you in loops. I lead you into a straight stretch that requires great patience. Because it lacks stimulating turns. There, you are not entertained by events, but nourished by truth. I know there are evenings when you sit quietly and wonder whether you are missing something. You see others busy, advancing quickly, announcing visible achievements, while you remain silent. You ask yourself whether this silence means I am no longer involved. But I tell you, this silence is a sign that I am involved more deeply than you are used to. I do not need to make noise to prove that I am at work. There is something I am gently removing from you, the habit of measuring your life by the rhythm of others. You have carried that habit for too long. It kept you in constant comparison, always explaining why you were slower, different, or not the same. I did not create you to be a delayed version of someone else. I created you with your own rhythm, and I am bringing you back to it. You begin to sense this when you no longer feel compelled to tell your whole story in order to be understood. There are things you now hold quietly, not out of shame, but because you no longer need external validation. This is a very quiet form of maturity, but a very real one. You are not closing yourself off. You are simply no longer scattering yourself to seek approval. I know there are moments when you miss the old days, when everything felt clearer, even if exhausting. It had direction. Now the direction has not yet appeared, but your heart is no longer tense. This exchange confuses you. Yet, my child, tension with direction is not better than peace without sight. I am giving you a different foundation, one where you can stand without trembling, so that when direction does open, you walk with steadiness rather than hunger. You no longer need to convince yourself with the mantra, everything will be fine. You are beginning to accept that some things are not fine yet, and that this does not undo you. This is a sign that you are growing strong in a quiet way. You do not deny reality, but you no longer allow reality to define the whole of who you are. I am teaching you to live between those two without being torn. Notice another small change. You are no longer drawn into every inner argument. Before, each negative thought demanded an immediate rebuttal. Now, you can let it pass without engaging. You do not lose to it. You simply no longer need to fight. This is not indifference, it is self-mastery. I am training you in very quiet ways, but they will hold you when larger waves come. You once asked me why you had to learn these lessons in silence without an audience, without milestones. I answer you with a simple truth, because these lessons are not meant for the stage. They are meant for your real life, where you must stand firm even when no one is watching. I am preparing you for places where, if you are not steady inside, the outside will crush you. I am not leading you on a detour to test you. I am leading you on a deeper path, so you will not be hollow. You lived for a long time filling emptiness with activity, responsibility, and usefulness. Now that those things have quieted, the emptiness feels more visible. But, my child, this emptiness does not need to be filled, it needs to be inhabited. It is here that I am reshaping you. There are things I do not hurry to tell you, not because I am withholding, but because if you knew too early, you would use information to control instead of choosing to trust. I do not want you to live by predicting every step. I want you to live by attachment. When you remain even without knowing everything, you are learning a form of trust more mature than any proof. You may feel that you are standing very close to something you have not yet touched. That feeling is both familiar and strange. Familiar, because you have stood at other thresholds in your life. Strange, because this time there is no loud summons. But my child, not every threshold announces itself with noise. Some thresholds open only when you are calm enough to step forward without being pushed. I am teaching you to become comfortable with not reacting immediately. You allow an email to wait. You allow an invitation to remain unanswered. You allow a day without productivity. These things once made you anxious. But now they are teaching you that life does not collapse when you stop running. You do not lose your worth when you are not in a hurry. Your value does not lie in speed. It lies in the truth you carry. I know there are moments when you ask yourself if I love you. Why don't I make everything easier for you? But, my child, I do not choose what is easy. I choose what is right. What is easy can quietly pull you off course without you noticing. What is right keeps you aligned, even if it requires you to move more slowly. I am protecting you from paths that would demand the sacrifice of precious parts you have only just learned to guard. You are not abandoned in this space. On the contrary, you are being held very close, so close that I do not need to call your name loudly. I am present in the moments when you exhale more deeply. I am present in the decision you choose not to send. I am present when you choose rest instead of strain. These signs are not spectacular, but they speak the truth. You are in the right place. And my child, when you are calm enough, you will realize that I have never stopped leading you. I have only changed the way I lead, no longer by pulling forcefully, but by walking alongside you, no longer by flashing lights, but by light that is sufficient for each step. You do not need to see the entire road. You only need enough light for the next step. I will take care of the rest. You were once accustomed to a God who acts through wide open doors, through obvious movements, through answers that arrive quickly. But my child, if I were only present in such moments, you would learn to chase signs without learning how to remain. I am teaching you a different kind of closeness, a closeness that does not need proof, does not need to overwhelm you, but is enough to keep you from unraveling on days when nothing outwardly happens. There are days when you wake up without the urge to immediately fix your life. That can feel frightening, because you once thought that urgency was faith. But I tell you, not every urge comes from me. Some urgencies are simply anxiety dressed as zeal. When I give you rest, I do not make you lazy. I return you to the right rhythm so that you no longer have to fight yourself. You are beginning to see that true peace does not arrive as an intense emotion. It comes as a quiet, steady foundation. You are not exhilarated, but you are not panicked either. You do not know exactly what comes next, but you no longer feel the need to defend yourself against the future. This is very new for you, because you once lived by constantly preparing for what could go wrong. I am gently removing that layer of vigilance, thread by thread. I know you fear that if you are not proactive, everything will slip from your grasp. But my child, there are things that only remain steady when you stop gripping them tightly. I am teaching you to trust that I am at work even when you cannot see progress. I do not need you to check constantly in order for me to act. I need you to be calm enough not to disrupt my rhythm with decisions born of anxiety. You have asked yourself many times whether I have forgotten you when everything seems to stand still. I answer you with this truth: I do not forget what I am holding. People forget what they let drift. I remember what I keep. And you are being kept not on a shelf, but in my hands, not for display, but for preservation. There are things that, if I allowed you to touch them too early, would cost you the very wholeness you have just begun to recover. I am not withholding from you. I am being careful for you. I know what has begun to heal within you, and I will not allow it to be torn open simply because you are impatient to prove that you are ready. Readiness is not restlessness to move forward. Readiness is the ability to remain without breaking yourself. You are learning something you did not know before. Remaining is not standing still in fear, but standing still in trust. Trust is not loud. It does not require grand promises to reassure itself. It needs only one truth, deep enough to hold you. I am here, and I am not letting go of you. I see you beginning to do very small but very honest things. You no longer explain every choice you make. You no longer rush into conversations just to be understood at any cost. You allow others not to keep pace with you. This once made you feel selfish. But I tell you, it is not selfishness, it is maturity. You are no longer bending yourself to fit the rhythm of places where I am no longer positioning you. The silence you are living in is not an undefined waiting space. It is a space of refinement. Old motives are settling. Old hungers no longer govern you as they once did. You are beginning to hear more clearly what is from me and what is merely the echo of fear. And when you hear clearly, you do not need to run. You know when it is time to step. I want you to know that I am not preparing a new path for you by making you forget the old one. I prepare it by removing the old path's power to call you back. When you are no longer pulled backward, you can move forward naturally, without force. That is how I lead, without yanking, without pushing, without shouting. You are about to enter a season where you no longer have to strain to keep yourself intact. You will walk with a wholeness that was forged in silence. Others may not understand why you are steadier without visible proof, but you know, and I know, that is enough. I do not often lead you through loud signs, because loud things are easily confused with passing emotion. I prefer small markers, not because I am weak, but because I want you to learn to see with a quiet gaze. You are used to looking for guidance in what overwhelms, in moments that make your heart race and your mind busy. And so you miss the gentle, repeated leadings I placed before you each day, a line that touches you without explanation at just the right moment. A meeting that seems accidental but leaves a clean aftertaste. A quiet prompting that returns persistently, not forcing, not rushing, simply waiting until you are still enough to notice. You once doubted these small things, thinking that if they were from me, they would be clearer, stronger, more certain. But my child, I do not need to compete for your attention. I lead through faithfulness, through steady signs that are not showy but undeniable to those willing to pause. You are beginning to see that what comes from me does not cause you to lose yourself. It makes you cleaner. It does not leave confusion behind, but a clarity of spirit, even when you do not yet know what the next step will be. There are moments when you sense very clearly a pure inner prompting, not driven by fear of loss, not by the desire to be ahead of anyone else, but simply because it is right. You cannot fully explain why, yet you know that if you follow it, you will not betray yourself. This is how I lead you step by step, in small movements, without skipping ahead, without forcing the pace. Just as Elijah did not hear me in the strong wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:1-2. I am also training your ear to recognize me in what is quiet, not loud. As you learn to notice the small signs, you stop demanding that I speak in ways you are accustomed to. You no longer brush past meaningful coincidences, no longer dismiss moments that touch deeply simply because they are not dramatic. You begin to hold them in your heart, to let them repeat, to allow them to arrange themselves into a path that is real and trustworthy. And you will realize this: I am not in a hurry to change your direction. I am adjusting your rhythm. The signs I place do not make you run, they teach you how to walk. You no longer need to hold a detailed map to continue. You only need to be faithful to the next sign. When you look with settled eyes, you see more clearly, not because you know more, but because there is less noise. I lead you not with flashes of lightning, but with footprints in the sand, close enough for you to follow, gentle enough that you are not swept away. You will be surprised to discover that these very small signs have kept you from many turns you once thought were opportunities. Not because I slammed doors shut, but because you had become awake enough not to be drawn in. My guidance does not make you dependent, it makes you mature. And when you look back, you will see that an entire stretch of the journey was shaped by things you almost overlooked. I need you to hear this clearly, because it touches the deepest fear within you. You are not falling behind. You have lived too long with the sense that you are always a step late, always chasing, always needing to speed up so as not to be left behind. You watch others move ahead, change seasons, reap results, and inside you a question quietly rises: what about me? That question tightens your body, disrupts your steps, and convinces you that if you do not run, life will close its doors to you. But my child, I have not placed you in a race. I do not measure you by speed, nor do I compare your steps to anyone else's. I am bringing you into a steady rhythm where you do not need to chase life, because life is being led to walk with you. This rhythm is not fast, not slow, but right. It allows you to breathe without fear of missing out, to step forward without constantly looking over your shoulder to see who is passing you. When you walk with me, you do not have to pursue the future. The future opens with each step you place down in peace. You will begin to notice the subtle difference between running and walking. When you run, your eyes are fixed far ahead, your body tense, your heart driven, and even small obstacles can throw you off balance. When you walk with me, your eyes do not need to look far, they only need to see enough for the next step. Your hand does not need to grip tightly, it is placed in mine. There will still be moments when you fear being late, when you feel small before the great movements of life. But that hand holds you in the present, so you are not swept into futures drawn by anxiety. I do not promise that you will always understand why this rhythm is the right one. There will be days when it feels unbearably slow, especially when you look around and see others moving faster. But my child, what is steady makes little noise, and so it is often overlooked. It works quietly, building a foundation within you before allowing you to step outward. When you walk slowly but rightly, you do not only arrive, you arrive without losing yourself along the way. You will also learn a paradox when you stop trying to catch up. Your sense of self-respect begins to return. Not self-worth built on achievement, but the dignity of someone who knows where they are and why they are there. You no longer apologize for your pace, no longer explain why you have not arrived yet. You stand straighter not because you are taller, but because you no longer bow to the fear of being left behind. I am teaching you this not through theory, but through the very real experience of each day. Walking with me also means allowing me to adjust you when needed, without jerking, without dragging. There will be times when I slow you down further, not because you are off course, but because you need depth to continue. There will be times when I open an unexpected step, and you will be surprised that you do not panic. That is the sign you have grown accustomed to my rhythm. You no longer need to prepare your heart for every possibility. You only need to be present, to listen, and to step. My child, a steady rhythm does not make you immediately visible, but it makes you enduring. And endurance is what you have been asking for, even when you did not have words for it. When you walk with me, you do not need to prove that you are on the right path. The peace that follows your steps will testify. You are not late, not lost, not outside the plan. You are within my rhythm, and that rhythm is sufficient to carry you to the place I have prepared, not through haste, but through faithfulness, one step at a time. You have called it silence, but my child, it has never been absence. It is my way of being near without overwhelming, of leading without pulling. When I do not open the way forward and do not allow you to turn back, you think you are standing before a wall, but I am standing there with you, not to explain, but to show you this: a door does not open by force, it opens by the willingness to remain. You were accustomed to moving forward on the momentum of fear, on the reflex of having to do something so as not to feel empty. So when familiar paths are closed, you panic. Yet it is precisely in that moment that I place you where you can no longer run by old habits. Silence reveals what noise once concealed. In that silence, you begin to see how much of your life was driven by what-ifs, by constant effort to avoid facing the truth that you were tired. I do not expose this to weaken you. I expose it so you will no longer deceive yourself. You are not trapped between two doors. You are being held at the threshold, where you cannot go back and do not yet need to rush forward. There, you learn something very difficult: how to remain without controlling the outcome. The door of silence does not open when you demand answers. It opens when you stop demanding. When you dare to admit that you do not know how to take the next step and yet do not turn back, I see that you are ready, not ready to move quickly, but ready to move truthfully. Silence becomes an entryway, not because it disappears, but because you no longer resist it. You stand there undefended, unarranged, and I see that you are in the right place. A very subtle shift happens when you stop interpreting silence as abandonment. You begin to recognize that the seasons when I speak less are the seasons when I work more deeply. I do not need to repeat what I have already said enough times. I allow you to live within it. You have heard about trust, about surrender, about being held, but it is in silence that these things sink into your body. You no longer know them only in your mind. You know them in the way you breathe, the way you sleep, the way you respond when life does not go your way. The door of silence has led you into another way of living a life that no longer needs constant validation. You no longer ask every day whether you are on the right path, because you can feel the ground beneath your feet. The questions have not disappeared entirely, but they no longer govern you. You can live with what is unresolved without feeling lost. That is the sign you have crossed the threshold. There was no loud sound, no dramatic moment, only a morning when you realized you no longer needed to prove to anyone that you were okay. I did not bring you through this door to separate you from life. On the contrary, you step into life with a different presence. You work, you speak, you love, but no longer from hunger. You no longer use busyness to cover emptiness, nor words to fill silence. You carry a peace that does not announce itself, and it is precisely that quietness that steadies you amid great movement. I did not change your circumstances first. I changed how you are within them. And you will see this: the doors that once closed no longer make you panic, not because you have grown numb, but because you know I do not close doors to abandon you. You have learned the language of silence, and so you no longer misread the signs. When I am silent, you do not run. When I open, you do not rush. You walk no more, no less in a rhythm that has been reset from within. My child, the door of silence is not an ending. It is the entrance into a mature life. Maturity is not knowing more, but no longer needing everything to be spoken aloud in order to trust. You have walked long enough to understand that what is true is not loud. You have stood at the threshold long enough to know that being held is not the same as being delayed. And now, as you look back, you see clearly what I did not allow you to return to saved you from having to live again, versions of yourself you had already outgrown. You enter a new season not with explosion, but with solidity. No one needs to announce this to you. You can feel it yourself. You do not need permission to remain in peace. You do not need a grand reason to move forward. I do not promise that you will never face wind, but I have placed you where the wind no longer defines you. You stand not because you are stronger than others, but because you have learned how to stand when there is nothing left to cling to but me. The door of silence now stands behind you, not as a wall, but as a sacred threshold you have passed through. You do not need to turn back to check whether it is still there. Its mark is within you, a quiet freedom, an ability to remain with truth without collapsing, a faith that does not need to prove itself. I did not bring you here so you would stop. I brought you here so you could walk without fear of losing yourself along the way. And as you walk, I walk with you, not ahead to pull, not behind to push, but beside you, in rhythm. You do not need to see far. You only need to place the next step in the truth you already have. That is enough. The door has opened not with sound, but through the very life you are now living. My child, now that you have come to the end of striving to understand everything, to control everything, to hold yourself together by force, I want you to hear this clearly. You did not enter this season because you were strong, but because you stopped bracing yourself. What you called an ending was simply the point where you no longer needed to grip so tightly. I did not wait for you to be perfect before receiving you. I received you when you were real enough to lay your hands down and let me hold you. You carried for so long the sense that if you let go, everything would fall apart. But, my child, there are things that stand only when you stop supporting them in the wrong way. I am not asking you to abandon responsibility. I am asking you to release burdens that were never yours. There are still things you do each day, but no longer from fear of being abandoned, no longer from the hunger to prove yourself, no longer from the frantic rhythm of trying to keep up. I am teaching you to live with me, not to live in place of me. When you look back on the road behind you, you may not yet see the full meaning of every pause, every closed door, every extended silence. But I have seen it all. I have seen you learn to stay instead of escape. I have seen you choose faithfulness in small things no one applauded. I have seen you refuse to return to old paths, even when they felt familiar and easier. And I tell you this, none of it has been forgotten. Not a single tear fell in vain. Not a single day of waiting was disregarded. You enter this new season not as one released into emptiness, but as one placed into a different order. This order is not loud, not hurried, not demanding display. It is quiet enough for you to hear yourself, steady enough for you to stand without a role to perform. I do not promise that everything will be easy. I promise that you will not be alone. I do not promise that the wind will never come. I promise that you will not be carried away by it. There are things about to open before you in very simple ways, not with trumpets, not with spotlights, not with turns that impress others, just a clarity that arrives at the right time. a meeting that carries a gentle rhythm, a decision without inner tug of war. You will recognize them not because they are big, but because they do not make you panic. Peace goes before them, and peace remains after them. That is the sign that I am in them. I know you still carry questions without answers, but, my child, not every question must be answered immediately for you to live rightly. Some questions are held so you can learn trust. So you do not turn understanding into a refuge in place of me. You do not need to see the whole road. You only need enough light for the next step. I will not withdraw the light while you still need it. When you are tired, I do not accuse you. When you are slow, I do not hurry you. When you stop, I do not leave. I was here before you learned to call my name, and I will still be here when you forget to call it. You do not need to remind me of you. I have never forgotten. Your name is not erased by days of weakness, nor blurred by moments of doubt. You belong to me, not because you do things right, but because I have chosen you, my beloved child. Let this rest soak into you like water into dry ground. No haste, no proving, no comparison. You have walked far enough that you do not need to turn back, and you have stood still enough that you no longer need to run. From here, each step you take may be small, but it will be true. Each decision you make may be quiet, but it will be in rhythm. And when you lose your way, I will not shout. I will touch gently because you have learned how to listen. Now you are no longer standing before a closed door, nor do you need to stand before an open one. You are in my hands, and that is the safest place of all. When I open, you will know. When I hold you, you will understand. Your part is not to predict, but to remain, not to strive harder, but to be more faithful, not to brace yourself, but to trust deeply. My beloved child, enter this rest as you would enter your own home without fear of being exposed, without fear of being rejected, without fear of being too slow. I am here. I have always been here, and from this place, everything will be set back into its proper order. Thank you for listening to today's message. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue to receive the living word together. Build a steadfast faith and walk in the boundless love of God. Amen.